The first thing I noticed wasn't the baby's heartbeat flickering on the black and white screen. It was Dr. Evans's hands. They were shaking. She wasn't looking at me, and she definitely wasn't looking at the miracle growing inside my belly. She was staring at the paperwork, her pupils dilated so wide with fear, they swallowed the blue of her eyes. Then she did something that made the air leave the room. She flipped the monitor switch. Click. The rhythmic whoosh whoosh of the heartbeat vanished, leaving a silence so heavy it felt like physical pressure against my eardrums. Dr. Evans stood up, walked to the door, and locked it. The metallic thud echoed in the sterile room like a gunshot. "Dr. Evans," I whispered, clutching my belly where the cold gel made my skin shiver. "Is my baby okay?" "The baby is fine, Luna," she said, turning around, her face pale as a sheet. "But you are not. You need to leave. Right now. Do not go home. Do not go back to him." I laughed, a jagged, nervous sound. My husband Caleb was waiting outside in his shiny Tesla to take me to the most important dinner of his career. But my laughter died in my throat when she slid the file across the desk. "I checked the transfer logs," she hissed. "Your husband's sample was discarded, and donor ID 4922 was injected into your eggs." The world tilted. I looked down at the text, and in that split second I realized this wasn't just a medical record. It was a crime scene. Caleb hadn't just lied about his infertility. He had orchestrated a cruel trap. Clause 17 of our prenup flashed in my mind. The fidelity clause. If I cheated and conceived a child, I would forfeit all assets and custody. Caleb didn't want to be a father. He wanted to prove the baby wasn't his to trigger the penalty, seize custody, and control my grandfather's $50 million trust fund. He was shorting his own marriage. "Luna," Dr. Evans said, "he is waiting. If you go out there and act normal, you are walking into a slaughterhouse." But in that moment, the naive Luna, who believed in fairy tales, died right there in that exam chair. I stood up, grabbed the evidence file, and walked out. Caleb met me with his perfect smile and the scent of expensive cologne. "Everything okay, babe? Heartbeat strong?" he asked, playing the role of the devoted husband. "Strong as an ox." I lied, buckling my seatbelt. Click. He drove the Tesla toward the party, believing he was driving toward his crowning achievement. He had no idea he was driving us both off a cliff. The doctor's hands were shaking. That was the first thing I noticed. Not the screen where my baby's heartbeat was flickering like a tiny black and white ghost, but the tremor in Dr. Evans' fingers. She was staring at the paperwork, not at me, and definitely not at the miracle growing inside my belly. Her eyes were darting back and forth across the page, reading the same line over and over again. Her pupils dilated so wide they swallowed the blue of her irises. Then she did something that made the air leave the room. She reached out and flipped the power switch on the monitor. Just like that. Click. The rhythmic whoosh 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 of the heartbeat, the sound I had spent 3 years and $50,000 waiting to hear, vanished. The room fell into a silence so heavy it felt like physical pressure against my eardrums. It felt like someone had just pulled the plug on my entire life. "Dr. Evans," I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded. Is there no heartbeat?" She didn't answer. She didn't even look at me. She stood up her chair, scraping harshly against the linoleum floor, and walked straight to the office door. She closed it. Then she locked it. The metallic thud of the deadbolt echoed in the small, sterile room like a gunshot. My hands flew to my stomach instinctively. The cold ultrasound gel felt sticky and gross against my skin, shivering as goosebumps erupted all over my arms. Panic, cold and sharp, started to claw at my throat. "Please," I whispered, "is the baby okay?" Dr. Evans finally turned around. Her face was as white as the lab coat she wore. She looked sick. "The baby is fine, Luna. Physically, the fetus is perfect." The relief should have washed over me, but it didn't. Because she wasn't looking at the ultrasound images, she was looking at the file on her desk. Specifically, she was staring at the name printed in bold black letters at the top of the legal forms: Caleb Rossi. "Mrs. Rossi," she said, and her voice was barely a whisper, vibrating with a fear I couldn't understand. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. I need you to leave this clinic. I need you to get in a taxi. Do not go home. Do not pack a bag. Go to a hotel. Go to a friend's house. Just do not go back to him." I laughed. It was a nervous, jagged sound that bounced off the walls. Why we're having a Sunday dinner tonight. The partners are coming. It's the biggest night of Caleb's career. If I'm not there, that is exactly the problem, she cut me off. She pushed the folder across the desk toward me, but she didn't let go of it, her knuckles white. "I saw the lab requisition forms this morning. I checked the donor ID against the transfer logs. I thought it was a clerical error. God, I prayed it was an error." She looked me dead in the eye and I saw real terror there. It wasn't. "I don't understand," I said, my brain refusing to process the words. "We used Caleb's sample. We did ICSI. We saw the embryologist." "You saw what he wanted you to see," Dr. Evans hissed. "Luna, look at the signature on the release form. Look at the date." I looked down. The letters swam before my eyes, but then they focused, and in that split second the world tilted on its axis. It wasn't just a medical record, it was a crime scene. "He's waiting for me," I whispered, the realization hitting me harder than a physical blow. "He's right outside." "Then run out the back," she pleaded. I looked at the ultrasound wand sitting in its cradle dripping with gel. Then I looked at the window. Through the blinds I could see the parking lot. I could see our silver Audi shining in the afternoon sun. And leaning against it, checking his watch, was Caleb. He looked perfect. He was wearing the navy suit I bought him for our anniversary. His hair was styled perfectly. He was smiling at a passing nurse, that dazzling, charming smile that had convinced me to marry him, that had convinced my parents to invest in his firm, that had convinced the world he was the golden boy of finance. He checked his watch again. He wasn't impatient. He was calculating. If I ran now, what would happen? I had no money of my own. He managed our accounts. I had no proof, just a file in a doctor's office that he could easily make disappear. He was powerful. He was beloved. And I was the emotional, hormonal, pregnant wife who had been struggling with fertility depression for years. That's the narrative he'd planted. If I ran, I would look crazy. If I ran, he would win. "I can't," I said, wiping the cold gel off my belly with a rough paper towel. The friction burned my skin. "Luna, he is dangerous," Dr. Evans said, her voice trembling. "You don't know what he's done." "I know exactly what he's done," I said, surprising myself. A strange cold calm settled over me. It was the calm of a soldier realizing they are behind enemy lines. I pulled my shirt down. I smoothed my hair. "But if I leave now, he'll know that I know, and I need him to think he's safe, just for a little longer." I unlocked the door. The sound was softer this time, but it felt like I was unlocking a cage to walk into a lion's den. I walked out of the clinic, the automatic doors sliding open with a cheerful whoosh. The warm air hit my face, smelling of exhaust and blooming jasmine, a sickly sweet combination. Caleb looked up. His face lit up instantly. The mask of the loving husband slid into place so effortlessly that it was terrifying. He pushed off the car and opened the passenger door for me. "Hey, beautiful," he said, kissing my cheek. He smelled of cedarwood and expensive mints. "How's our little champion heartbeat strong?" I looked at him. I looked at the hollow of his throat where his pulse was beating steadily. I thought about the document on Dr. Evans's desk. I thought about the lie growing inside me and the lie standing in front of me. I got into the car. The leather seat was warm, wrapping around me like a glove. "Strong as an ox," I lied, buckling my seatbelt. Click. "Everything is absolutely perfect." Caleb smiled, satisfied. He closed the door, sealing us in. As he walked around to the driver's side, I watched him through the windshield. He thought he was driving me to a celebratory dinner. He thought he was driving toward his promotion, his legacy, his perfect future. He had no idea he was driving us both off a cliff. He started the engine. Ready for tonight? The partners are going to love you. I'm ready, I said, resting my hand on my belly. But as we pulled out of the parking lot, my phone buzzed in my purse. I didn't check it, but I knew who it was. And I knew that tonight the Sunday dinner wasn't just about food. It was about survival. Because while Caleb was playing chess with my life, he forgot one thing: even a pawn can kill a king if it moves the right way. The silence in the Tesla was deafening. Caleb loves this car. He loves that it makes no noise, that it feels like a spaceship, that everything is white leather and touchscreens. It's clean, it's efficient, it has no soul. I hate it. I stared out the window as the landscape shifted from the gray concrete of the city to the lush manicured green of the Hamptons, and I found myself wishing I were in my grandfather's car. It's a 1974 Porsche 911 Targa, older than I am. The leather seats are cracked and smell like stale tobacco and aged oak barrels. The engine growls and rattles when you hit 60, and the steering wheel vibrates in your hands so hard you can feel the road in your bones. That car is honest. It tells you exactly what it is. Caleb is the Tesla, shiny, quiet, and completely empty on the inside. He reached over and turned up the air conditioning. He didn't ask if I was hot. He just decided. "You're sweating, babe," he said, his eyes never leaving the road. "Nervous about the partners?" "A little?" I lied. I wasn't nervous. I was terrified, but not of his business partners. I was terrified because I finally realized where I was. People think I'm just rich. They see the clothes, the vacations, the charity galas. They don't see the weight of it. The Rossi Culinary Group isn't just a bank account. It is 70 years of New York history. My grandfather Antonio came here with nothing but a suitcase and a recipe for ragu that tasted like home. He built an empire of tomato sauce vineyards and Michelin stars from scratch. We own half the meatpacking district. We feed the city. That is what I am protecting. And that is exactly what Caleb wants to eat alive. He calls himself an angel investor. That's what it says on his business cards: Caleb Rossi Venture Capital. He took my last name when we got married. At the time he told me it was a feminist statement. He said, "Luna, your name is a legacy. I want to honor that." I cried. I thought it was the most romantic thing I had ever heard. I was so stupid. It wasn't romance. It was branding. He wore my last name like a costume so he could walk into rooms he didn't belong in. "I picked up the wine for tonight," he said, tapping the steering wheel. "A 1982 Brunello. $3,000. The partners will be impressed." He grinned, that easy winning grin that charms waiters and CEOs alike. He loves to pay for things. He fights for the check at dinner. "Put your wallets away, guys, I got this." He loves the power of the moment when he throws his card down on the table. But do you know the worst part? The card is a black Amex. It's heavy. It's made of titanium. And right there under his name in tiny letters, you can barely see it, says, "Authorized user." It's my account. It's my grandfather's money. He buys the world drinks with my inheritance, and everyone calls him generous. I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the pregnancy. How did I miss this? How did I let him take over so completely? My mother tried to tell me, "God, Donatella Rossi." She is 5 feet 2 inches of pure terror in a vintage Chanel suit. She has eyes that can spot a fake diamond or a fake person from across a crowded ballroom. I remember the first time she met Caleb. It was 3 years ago. I brought him to the estate for Easter. Everyone loved him. My cousins, my aunts, even the dogs loved him. But Mama, she watched him like a hawk circling a field mouse. Later that night, I found her in the kitchen rolling gnocchi by hand. The flour was dusting the air like snow. "He's perfect, Mama," I had said, floating on a cloud of new love. "Isn't he wonderful?" She didn't stop rolling the dough. She didn't even look up. "Luna, listen to me. A man who is too perfect is like a dessert with too much sugar." "What does that mean?" I asked, annoyed. She finally looked at me, wiping her floury hands on her apron. "It means the sugar is there to hide the bitter taste. Real things have flaws, Luna. This man, he has no edges. He is rehearsed." I screamed at her. I told her she was bitter because Dad left. I told her she was jealous of my happiness. I stopped inviting her to Sunday dinners. We haven't had a real conversation in 2 years. And sitting in this silent, expensive car, realizing she was right about everything, broke my heart more than Dr. Evans' revelation. Almost there, Caleb said. We turned off the main road and drove through the massive iron gates of the Rossi estate. The gravel crunched under the tires, crunch, crunch, crunch. It usually sounds like home. Today it sounded like bones breaking. The house loomed ahead, a stone fortress covered in ivy. It was supposed to be my sanctuary. Now it felt like the scene of a crime that hadn't happened yet. Caleb put the car in park. The silence rushed back in. He turned to me and squeezed my knee. His hand felt hot, suffocating. "Hey," he said, his voice dropping to that serious business guru tone he uses when he's about to ask for money. "Tonight is big. These partners, they're ready to fund the expansion. But they need to see we're a united front. So when I bring up the vineyard mortgage, just nod. Okay. Don't ask questions in front of them. We'll talk details later." The vineyard mortgage. My blood ran cold. He wasn't just stealing from the accounts anymore. He was coming for the land. He was coming for the heart of the family. He wanted to mortgage the one thing my grandfather swore we would never sell, probably to fund some tech startup that would disrupt the industry and then vanish into thin air. I looked at him. I looked at the man I slept next to every night. He wasn't looking at me with love. He was looking at me like I was a signature on a contract. He was checking to see if his asset was compliant. "Of course, Caleb," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it was cracking my face. "United front." "Good girl," he said. He actually patted my leg, like I was a dog. He opened his door and stepped out into the fresh air, adjusting his suit jacket, ready to perform. I sat there for 1 second longer. I touched my belly. Good girl, that's what he thought I was. A good girl. A quiet wife. A blank check. I unbuckled my seatbelt. Click. I wasn't a good girl anymore. I was a Rossi. And he was about to find out that sugar doesn't just hide bitterness. It fuels fire. I stepped out of the car, my heels sinking slightly into the gravel, and followed my husband toward the front door. The lions were waiting inside, but for the first time I wasn't the prey. I was the hunter. Pop. The sound of Caleb uncorking the $3,000 bottle of Brunello echoed through the high ceilings of our foyer. That sound, that hollow, sudden pop, made me flinch. It didn't remind me of celebrations. It reminded me of the rubber stopper on a vial of menopur. It reminded me of the sterile white room where my life turned into a science experiment 2 years ago. I watched him pour the wine into the crystal decanter. His hands were steady, strong, the hands of a man in control. But 2 years ago in Dr. Varma's office, those same hands were shaking violently as he covered his face, sobbing so hard his shoulders heaved. Azoospermia, the urologist had said. It's a fancy medical word that means zero. Zero count, zero motility, zero chance. I remember the silence that followed. It was heavy, suffocating. Then Caleb exploded. He didn't hit me. He's too smart for bruises, but he swept an entire stack of brochures off the doctor's desk. They fluttered to the floor like dead birds. He fell to his knees right there on the ugly commercial carpet, burying his face in my lap. "I'm broken, Luna," he had wailed, his voice cracking. "I'm half a man. I can't give you a legacy. I can't give you anything." I held him. I stroked his hair. I cried with him. My heart was breaking for him. I felt this immense, crushing weight of guilt. Here I was, the heiress with the healthy eggs and the perfect uterus, and he was the self-made man who couldn't do the one thing biology demanded. I wanted to fix him. I wanted to take his pain away. God, I was such a fool. I didn't know then that his tears were just salt water. I didn't know that his grief was a performance rehearsed in front of a mirror while I was sleeping. He wasn't crying because he couldn't have a baby. He was crying because he needed me to feel sorry for him. Because a woman who feels pity doesn't ask questions. A woman who feels guilty writes checks without looking at the amount. We'll do IVF, I had promised him, wiping his tears. We'll do XSI. Science can fix this. And that's when the real torture began. For me, not for him. Do you know what IVF feels like? It feels like you are a pincushion. For 3 weeks, my stomach was a map of bruises, yellow, purple, green. Every morning at 7:00 a.m., Caleb would mix the hormones. He was so supportive. He'd flick the syringe, push the air out, and pinch the skin on my belly. "I'm so sorry, babe," he would say, his eyes full of fake sympathy. "I hate hurting you. I'm doing this for us." Then he'd stab me. I took the shots. I took the bloating that made me look 5 months pregnant when I was just empty. I took the mood swings. I underwent the egg retrieval surgery, anesthesia, long needles, cramping that felt like knives twisting inside me. I did it all because I thought we were partners. I thought we were fighting a battle against nature together. But we weren't fighting nature. We were fighting his lie. The day of the transfer, the day the baby was made, was the masterpiece of his con. The doctors used a technique called ICSI. It stands for intracytoplasmic sperm injection. Basically, they take a single sperm and force it into the egg. It's invasive, it's precise, and it's expensive. Caleb had insisted on handling the logistics that day. He went into the collection room alone. He came out looking exhausted, pale, and wiping sweat from his forehead. "That was hard," he'd said, slumping into the chair next to me. "But I think I got a good sample, for us." I squeezed his hand, feeling so much love for him. I thought he had just overcome his deepest insecurity. Now I know the truth. He didn't produce a sample. He didn't overcome anything. While I was in a hospital gown waiting to be wheeled into surgery, he was in the hallway handing an envelope of cash to a nurse named Molly. He was swapping his empty cup for one filled by a stranger, some broke grad student, or a random donor who looked enough like him to pass a cursory glance. He let me inject my body with hormones. He let me undergo surgery. He let me carry a stranger's child inside me for 4 months. And he did it all so he could trap me. Luna. Caleb's voice snapped me back to the present. He was holding a glass of wine out to me. The 1982 Brunello. The red liquid swirled in the glass, dark as blood. "You okay?" he asked. "You're zoning out. The partners will be here in 5 minutes." I looked at the wine. I looked at his hand, the hand that had held the syringe, the hand that had paid the bribe, the hand that was currently wearing a platinum wedding band I paid for. "I'm fine," I said, my voice steady. I didn't take the wine. "Just thinking about how far we've come, about the miracle." He smiled. It was the smile of a predator who thinks the cage door is locked. "It is a miracle, isn't it? Everything is falling into place." The doorbell rang. It was a sharp, demanding sound. Caleb straightened his tie. "Game time," he whispered. "Remember, smile. Let me do the talking about the money." I watched him walk toward the heavy oak door. He looked confident. He looked untouchable. He thought the people on the other side of that door were his ticket to the next level of wealth. He was wrong. Because I hadn't just invited his business partners to dinner. I had made a few other calls from the bathroom while he was buying the wine. The guests arriving weren't just here to eat lasagna and talk about interest rates. I smoothed my dress over my belly. The baby kicked a small, fluttering protest. "Don't worry," I told him silently. "Mommy's got this." Caleb opened the door. "Welcome, come in, come in." I walked up behind him, planting a smile on my face that was sharper than a scalpel. The dinner was served. But tonight, Caleb Rossi wasn't the one holding the knife. Clink, clink, clink. The sound of Caleb tapping his dessert spoon against his crystal wine glass cut through the chatter of the dinner party. It was sharp, precise, demanding attention, just like him. "To the future," he announced, raising his glass, his other arm draped protectively around my shoulders. "To the next generation of Rossis." The partners applauded. My mother sipped her water, her eyes narrow. I smiled, but my hand instinctively covered my stomach, shielding the baby from his touch. That toast. It sounded exactly like the one he made 4 months ago, the day the stick turned pink. I remember that morning vividly. I was sitting on the bathroom floor staring at those two parallel pink lines. I was shaking. After 2 years of needles, bruises, and tears, it had finally happened. I walked out into the bedroom holding the test like it was a fragile bird. Caleb, I whispered. It worked. He was tying his tie in the mirror. He stopped. He looked at the test in the reflection. Then he turned around. He didn't run to me. He didn't pick me up and spin me around. He smiled, but it was a tight, calculated smile. That's great, babe, he said. Then, without missing a beat, we should call the lawyer. We need to update the trust fund structures. And the prenup. I froze. The prenup? Why? He walked over, took the test from my hand, and set it on the dresser. Just housekeeping, Luna. You know how it is. With a kid involved, things get complicated, especially with Clause 17. Clause 17. The Fidelity Clause. My grandfather insisted on it. In the world of old money, paranoia is a family heirloom. The clause stated that if either spouse committed adultery, the cheater would forfeit all claims to marital assets and pay a penalty of $5 million. It was designed to protect me from gold diggers. Caleb knew that. He had read that document 1,000 times. Clause 17. I laughed nervously. Planning on cheating on me, Caleb? He chuckled, but his eyes were dead cold. Me never. But you've been spending a lot of time at the restaurant lately. You sure that's my kid in there, or is it Chef Marco's? He laughed like it was a joke. I forced myself to laugh too. But deep down my stomach twisted. Who jokes about paternity the second they find out they're going to be a father? That was the first crack in the glass. The second crack was the silence. Immediately after the good news, Caleb started traveling. Silicon Valley, he told me. Tech startups. The next big thing. I have to be there, Luna. I'm building this for us. He would leave on Friday nights and come back Monday mornings. He would come home looking exhausted, smelling of stale recycled air. But there was something else, a smell that didn't belong in the sanitized boardrooms of Palo Alto. One Monday he tossed his laundry bag on the bed. I'm hopping in the shower, he yelled. I picked up his shirt. It was a gray button-down. I buried my face in it, looking for his scent, looking for comfort. Instead, I smelled it. Smoke. Not the clean wood smoke of a fireplace, the heavy chemical stink of chain smoking indoors. And underneath that, the sickly sweet smell of cheap vanilla perfume. Not mine. Silicon Valley doesn't allow smoking in offices. And Caleb hates vanilla. I stood there holding his dirty shirt, feeling the room spin. He wasn't in California. He wasn't building a future. He was somewhere else entirely. Atlantic City. Maybe Vegas. Somewhere loud and dirty, where he could shed the skin of the perfect husband and be who he really was. Babe, you okay? I snapped back to the dinner party. Caleb was looking down at me, his hand tightening on my shoulder. The partners were waiting for me to drink to the toast. I'm fine, I said, raising my water glass. Just happy. To family, the partners echoed. I drank. The water tasted like metal. Caleb squeezed my shoulder again, a possessive claim. He thought he had me cornered. He thought Clause 17 was his weapon. Prove I cheated with the fake DNA test he was planning, and he walks away with $5 million and my dignity. He didn't know that I had found the receipts in his jacket pocket that morning. He didn't know that Silicon Valley was actually the Borgata Hotel in Atlantic City. And he certainly didn't know that the vanilla perfume had a name, a face, and a very interesting employment history at his own firm. Caleb turned back to the partners, launching into a story about ethical investing. I watched him lie. It was as natural to him as breathing. But there was one thing about Clause 17 he seemed to have forgotten. It works both ways. If he cheats, he leaves with nothing. Not a single dime of the Rossi fortune. and I was going to make sure he paid every penny. So, Luna, one of the partners asked, leaning forward, Caleb tells us you're planning a big announcement for the baby shower. Caleb stiffened. He hadn't told me about any announcement. Oh, yes, I said, my voice sweet as poisoned honey. It's going to be a reveal no one will ever forget. Caleb looked at me, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He thought the reveal was going to be the gender. I smiled at him, sipping my water. Oh, honey, we're revealing so much more than that. The applause from the dinner party echoed in my ears, a hollow thundering sound, but in my mind I was back in that cold, sterile room with Dr. Evans. The sound of Caleb's crystal glass clinking against the table dissolved into the sound of Dr. Evans flipping a page in that damning file. Snap. Rustle. Snap. That was the soundtrack of my life falling apart. Look at the timestamps, Luna. Dr. Evans had set her finger trembling as it pointed to a grid of numbers that looked like boring medical data but was actually a smoking gun. I leaned in. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a sound like an angry fly trapped in the ceiling. I looked at where her finger was pointing. It was the chain of custody log. In IVF, every sample, every egg, every embryo is tracked every single second. It's supposed to be a failsafe. It's supposed to be impossible to cheat. Your husband's sample was collected at 900 a.m. Dr. Evans explained, her voice low and urgent. Standard procedure, but look here. At 9:15 a.m., the log shows a quality control check initiated by a technician named Gary Thorne. Gary doesn't work here anymore. We fired him 6 months ago for petty theft. But on that day, on the day your baby was conceived, Gary accessed the sample storage. I stared at the name. Gary Thorne. I had never heard of him. He was just a ghost in the machine. And here, Dr. Evans continued, flipping to the next page. This is the donor registry. At 9:17 a.m., 2 minutes after Gary accessed the storage, a vial of donor sperm, donor ID 4922, was marked as thawed for analysis. But we don't thaw donor sperm for analysis, Luna. We only thaw it for use. The room started to spin. The smell of rubbing alcohol seemed to get sharper, burning the inside of my nose. So, I started, my voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. You're saying there was a mix-up, a mistake? Dr. Evans looked at me with pity that felt like a slap in the face. No. Mistakes happen in chaotic environments. IVF labs are not chaotic. This was a swap, a deliberate manual override of the system. Your husband's sample, the one with the azoospermia, the one he cried over, was discarded, and donor 4922 was injected into your eggs. She pulled out a photocopy of a bank statement. It was grainy black and white, but the numbers were clear. I hired a private auditor when I saw the discrepancy this morning. I shouldn't have. It's illegal for me to snoop like this, but I had to know. She pushed the paper toward me. Look at the deposit. There it was. A transfer of $20,000 into an offshore account linked to Gary Thorne. The source of the funds was obscured, hidden behind a shell company called Phoenix Ventures. Phoenix Ventures. I felt the bile rise in my throat. Caleb had an LLC called Phoenix Ventures. He told me it was for his angel investments in green energy. He wasn't investing in wind farms. He was investing in my destruction. But why? I whispered, my hand instinctively covering my belly again. Why would he do this? If he wanted a baby, we could have used a donor openly. I would have said yes. We could have adopted. Why lie? Why pretend it was his? Dr. Evans took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes. She looked 10 years older than she had when I walked in. Think, Luna. Think like a businessman. Think like him. And then it hit me. It hit me harder than the hormones, harder than the nausea. It hit me like a freight train loaded with gold bars. It wasn't about the baby. It was never about the baby. Clause 17. The math arranged itself in my head with terrifying clarity. If we divorced because we fell out of love, the prenup was ironclad. Caleb gets nothing. He walks away with the clothes on his back and his Tesla. My grandfather made sure of that. The Rossi money stays with the Rossis. But, Clause 17, the Fidelity Clause. If the spouse is found to be unfaithful, resulting in the conception of a child outside the marriage, the penalty was $5 million in immediate damages, plus emotional distress. Plus, and this was the kicker, if I was proven to be an unfit mother, a cheater, who lied about paternity, he could sue for full custody of the child. And whoever controls the child controls the trust fund my grandfather set up for my heirs. That trust fund is worth $50 million. Caleb didn't want a family. He wanted a hostile takeover. The plan was perfect in its cruelty. Step 1. Fake the infertility to justify IVF, making him the sympathetic victim. Step 2. Swap the sperm so the baby is biologically not his. Step 3. Play the loving father until the birth certificate is signed. Step 4. Wait. Wait for the baby to be born. Wait for the happy announcement. And then, Step 5. The trap. He would stage a doubt. Maybe he'd say the baby has blue eyes when we both have brown. Maybe he'd find a text message. He would demand a DNA test. Just for peace of mind, honey. And when that test came back negative, when it proved the baby wasn't his, he would be the devastated husband, the victim of a lying, cheating wife. The world would look at me, the rich heiress who slept around and tried to pass off a bastard child as her husband's, and they would hate me. The courts would hate me. He would take my money. He would take my reputation. And worst of all, he would take my baby not because he loved it, but because it was the key to the vault. He's shorting me, I said aloud. The realization made my blood turn to ice. He's betting against our marriage. He's shorting his own wife. Dr. Evans nodded slowly. He is waiting for the payout. And if you go home and act normal, you are walking right into the slaughterhouse. I looked down at my hands. They weren't shaking anymore. The fear that had gripped me when she first locked the door was gone. It had burned away, leaving something cold and hard in its place. I thought about the tears Caleb cried in the urologist's office. Fake. I thought about the way he held my hand during the egg retrieval. Fake. I thought about the nursery he was designing the daddy's little girl onesies he bought. Fake. 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 The Luna who walked into this clinic an hour ago, the Luna who believed in fairy tales, who thought her husband was her partner, who wanted to fix his broken heart, that Luna died right there in that chair. I stood up. My legs felt solid, strong. Dr. Evans, I said, and my voice was different. It was deeper. It didn't sound like a victim's voice. I need that file. I need the log. I need the bank transfer. I need everything. I can lose my license for giving you this, she said, her hand hovering over the folder. If you don't give it to me, I said, looking her dead in the eye, he wins. And a man who would do this to his wife, what do you think he'll do to a witness? She flinched. She knew I was right. Caleb was meticulous, but he was also ruthless. If he knew Dr. Evans had figured it out, she wouldn't just be fired. She'd be ruined. Or worse. She pushed the folder across the desk. Take it. It's a copy. I hid the original. I took the folder. It felt heavy like a weapon. I slid it into my oversized designer tote bag right next to the prenatal vitamins and the baby name book. One more thing, I said, pausing at the door. Does the donor 4922, does he know? It's an anonymous registry, Dr. Evans said. But I checked the file. He didn't donate anonymously. He's an open ID donor. That means the child can contact him when they turn 18. Or, I said, a dark idea forming in the back of my mind, the mother can contact him right now. Dr. Evans went pale. Luna, that's against protocol. Screw protocol, I said. Caleb broke the rules first. Now I'm rewriting them. I walked out of the office. The air in the waiting room was still cold, but I didn't feel it. I walked past the receptionist, past the happy couples holding hands, past the posters of smiling babies. I walked out into the sunshine where Caleb was waiting with his perfect smile and his deadly plan. I got into the car. I buckled my seatbelt. Click. Ready? He had asked. Ready, I had answered, and I was. I was ready to burn his entire world to the ground. But first I had to play the part. I had to be the loving wife. I had to be the incubator. I had to let him think he was winning right up until the moment I tightened the noose. The dinner party toast ended. To family! Everyone cheered. I raised my glass higher than anyone else. To the truth, I whispered into the rim of the glass. Caleb didn't hear me. He was too busy drinking his expensive wine, tasting the victory he thought was inevitable. He didn't know that the file was in my bag, sitting under the table just inches from his leg. He didn't know that I had already memorized the donor number. 4922. I wasn't just going to find him, I was going to use him. Caleb wanted a DNA test. Oh, I would give him a DNA test. But the results weren't going to destroy me. They were going to bury him. I took a sip of water, feeling the cool liquid slide down my throat. The game was on. And unlike Caleb, I wasn't playing for money. I was playing for blood. The water coming out of the clinic tap was freezing. It shocked my skin, but that was exactly what I needed. I splashed my face again and again, scrubbing at my cheeks until they burned. I grabbed a rough brown paper towel and wiped away the black streaks of mascara that had stained my skin like war paint gone wrong. I looked up at the mirror. The fluorescent light in the bathroom buzzed like an angry wasp, casting deep shadows under my eyes. The woman staring back at me looked shattered. Her eyes were red. Her lip was trembling. She looked like a victim. I hated her. I gripped the edge of the cold porcelain sink until my knuckles turned white. I took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of industrial lemon cleaner and despair. Then I closed my eyes and summoned the ghost of Antonio Rossi. My grandfather didn't build a culinary empire by being soft. He built it by crushing anyone who tried to steal his recipes or his land. I remembered the day I fell off my horse when I was 7. I was crying, holding my scraped knee. He didn't hug me. He handed me a handkerchief and said, "Luna, never let the enemy see you bleed. If you are hurt, you smile. You make them wonder why you are so happy." Caleb was the enemy, and I was bleeding, so I had to smile. I opened my makeup bag. My hands were steady now. I applied fresh concealer to hide the redness. I reapplied my lipstick, a shade called Power Red. I wasn't putting on makeup. I was putting on armor. I fluffed my hair, practiced a soft, dreamy look in the mirror, and whispered, "Showtime." The version of me that loved Caleb, the version that wanted to fix him, washed down the drain with the gray soapy water. The woman who walked out of that bathroom was a Rossi. And Rossis don't get mad. We get even. Click, clack, click, clack. My heels echoed on the tile floor as I walked back to the waiting area. The sound was sharp, rhythmic, like a countdown. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped into the afternoon sun. It was blindingly bright. Caleb was leaning against the Tesla, scrolling on his phone, looking bored. He checked his watch when he saw me, a flicker of irritation crossing his face, before he smoothed it over with that practiced charm. "Everything okay?" he asked, opening the car door. "You took a while." He was looking for cracks. He was scanning my face for tears, for worry, for any sign that Dr. Evans had told me the truth. I beamed at him. I gave him the biggest, brightest, stupidest smile of my life. "Oh, Caleb, it was amazing," I gushed, climbing into the passenger seat. I made sure my voice was high and breathy, the voice of a naive, happy wife. "Dr. Evans said the baby is perfect. Strong heartbeat. 10 fingers, 10 toes." I watched his shoulders relax. The tension left his jaw. He bought it. He thought I was still the clueless prey. That's great news, babe," he said, getting into the driver's seat. He didn't sound happy. He sounded relieved that his plan was still on track. So the doctor didn't mention anything. Unusual. Unusual. I blinked, widening my eyes innocently. No. Just that I need to rest and eat well. Why? Nothing, he said quickly, starting the car. The Tesla hummed to life, silent and soulless. Just making sure. Actually, I said, placing a hand on his arm. I felt his muscles tense under the expensive fabric of his suit. I was thinking, since the news is so good, we should really celebrate tonight. With the partners. Let's make the dinner a real party. Caleb smiled, and this time it reached his eyes because he saw dollar signs. A happy wife meant a compliant wife. A celebration meant he could parade me around, show off his family man image to the investors, and secure that funding he was so desperate for. I love that idea, he said, merging onto the highway. You're the best, Luna. I turned my head to look out the window so he wouldn't see the expression on my face shift. The landscape rushed by, a blur of green and gray. My mind was racing faster than the car. Step 1. Secure the evidence. The file was in my bag. Step 2. Secure the assets. I needed to call the forensic accountant my mother used during her divorce. Step 3. Find the biological father. Donor 4922. Caleb turned up the radio. Some upbeat pop song filled the cabin. He started tapping his fingers on the steering wheel, humming along. He was celebrating his victory. He thought he had trapped me in a cage of lies. He didn't realize that he had just locked himself in a cage with a tiger. I can't wait for tonight, I said softly, staring at his reflection in the side mirror. Me neither, he replied. He had no idea. Tonight he was expecting a toast to his success, but I was planning a roast, and I was going to turn the heat up until he burned. The bass from the string quartet downstairs thumped through the floorboards of the second-story study. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like a headache trying to get in. Or maybe it was just my own pulse hammering against my temples. I had told Caleb I needed to powder my nose. Instead, I was standing in the dark, breathing in the scent of old leather books and lemon polish, waiting for the only man in the world I actually trusted. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut, locking out the noise of the party. "You're late, Miss Luna," a voice rumbled from the shadows. Dante stepped into the sliver of moonlight coming through the window. He didn't look like a butler. He looked like a cinder-block wall wearing a tuxedo. Dante was the head of security for the Rossi estate, but that was just his polite title. Before he worked for my grandfather, he was FBI, Forensic Financial Crimes Division. He knew how to follow money through a maze, and he knew how to break the legs of the person holding it. I had to make a toast, I said, leaning against the heavy oak desk for support. My legs felt weak, but my mind was racing. Tell me you found something, Dante. Tell me Dr. Evans isn't the only one with a smoking gun. Dante didn't waste time with pleasantries. He walked over to the desk and placed a tablet in front of me. The screen glowed with a harsh blue light illuminating his scar that ran down his jawline. I didn't find something, Luna, he said, his voice flat and terrifyingly calm. I found everything. I looked at the screen. I expected to see bank accounts. I expected to see maybe a secret credit card or a receipt for a diamond necklace for a mistress. I didn't see that. I saw a chaotic spider web of red lines and graphs that looked like a heart attack. What am I looking at? I asked, squinting at the numbers. You're looking at Caleb's investment portfolio, Dante said, using air quotes that felt heavy. Luna, your husband isn't an angel investor. He's a gambler, and he's a bad one. My stomach dropped. Gambling like poker. No. Dante swiped the screen. Worse, crypto futures, leveraged 100 to 1. And illegal sports betting rings run out of Macau. He pointed to a column of numbers. See this last Tuesday. While he told you he was in a board meeting for a sustainable energy merger, he was actually betting on a 4th Division soccer match in Brazil. He bet $50,000 that a player would get a yellow card in the first 10 minutes. I stared at the screen. Did he win? He lost, Dante said. He always loses. That's the thing about addicts, Luna. They don't chase the money. They chase the loss. They chase the panic. I felt sick. The man I thought was calculating financial moves was actually throwing our future away on yellow cards and digital coins that didn't exist. How much? I whispered. How much has he lost? Dante tapped the screen again. A total sum appeared in bold red font. It blinked like a warning light. $5,200, $1,000, 5.2 million. Dante read the number out loud, making it real. That's the principle. The interest with these specific lenders is compounding daily. Loan sharks, I breathed. The kind that don't report to credit bureaus, Dante confirmed. The kind that break thumbs first and ask for payment second. That's why he's so desperate for the prenup payout. He's not trying to get rich, Luna. He's trying to stay alive. But the math didn't add up. I managed the family accounts. I saw the statements. If he had lost $5 million, I would have noticed. The main accounts were untouched. Where is he getting the money to play? I asked. He can't access the trust without my signature. Dante's face hardened. He swiped to a new tab. This one had the Rossi family crest at the top. It was the accounting log for the Rossi Young Chefs Foundation, our charity that gave scholarships to culinary students from underprivileged neighborhoods. He found a loophole, Dante explained, his voice dripping with disgust. He has signing authority for operational expenses under $10,000. It's meant for buying office supplies or paying caterers. It doesn't trigger an audit alert. I looked at the list of transactions. $9, $500, office supplies. $9, $800, catering deposit. $9, $200, event logistics. There were hundreds of them. Page after page of transactions, all just under the $10,000 limit. It was death by 1,000 cuts. He's structuring, Dante said. It's called smurfing, breaking a large theft into tiny pieces to avoid detection. He has been draining the charity fund dry for 18 months. He's stealing from the kids' Luna. He's betting their tuition money on crypto coins named after dogs. I felt a heat rise in my chest that had nothing to do with sadness. It was pure, unadulterated rage. My grandfather built that foundation. He built it because he remembered being hungry. And Caleb, my husband, the man in the designer suit downstairs drinking my wine, was using it as his personal casino chips. He's a monster, I whispered. He's a rat, Dante corrected. And rats get vicious when they're cornered. He turned off the tablet. The room plunged back into semi-darkness. The loan sharks gave him a deadline, Luna. My contacts on the street say he has until the baby is born to pay up, or else. Or else what? Or else they take it out of his hide, Dante said. Or yours. A chill went down my spine that made the room feel like a freezer. The danger wasn't just financial anymore. It was physical. Caleb needed that Clause 17 payout not just to buy a yacht, but to keep his kneecaps. He needed to destroy me to save himself. Can we go to the police? I asked. We could, Dante said, crossing his massive arms. But white-collar investigations take months. He'd be out on bail in 24 hours. And he'd know you know. He'd hide the assets. He'd destroy the evidence. He'd spin the narrative that you were the one spending the money. He was right. Caleb was a master manipulator. If I struck now, I might miss. I needed a kill shot. So we wait? I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. We wait, Dante agreed. I've already mirrored his phone. I'm tracking his location. But you have to go back down there. You have to finish that dinner. You have to let him think he's still the smartest man in the room. The sound of the music swelled downstairs. The party was moving to the ballroom. One more thing, Dante said as I turned to the door. He has a meeting scheduled for tomorrow night, 2:00 a.m., at the docks. With the loan sharks? No. Dante smiled, a grim, predatory baring of teeth. With the other woman, the one from the casino, the one whose perfume was on his shirt. My hand froze on the doorknob. The brass felt cold. Perfect. I said, and for the first time that night I genuinely smiled. Get the car ready, Dante. If my husband is going on a date, I think I should crash it. I opened the door and the noise of the party rushed in loud and chaotic. But it didn't bother me anymore. I had the truth. I had Dante. And tomorrow night I was going to have photos. Caleb Rossi thought he was playing a high-stakes game. He didn't know the house always wins. And this is my house, thrum, thrum, thrum. The windshield wipers of Dante's SUV sliced through the heavy rain, a hypnotic rhythm that matched the beating of my heart. We weren't at the estate anymore. We were parked in the shadow of the biomedical library at the State University, 2 hours away from my life, waiting for a ghost. That's him, Dante said, his voice low. I looked out the window. Walking out of the library, huddled under a broken umbrella, was a kid. He looked impossibly young. He was wearing a faded hoodie and carrying a backpack that looked heavy enough to break his spine. This was Leo, donor 4922, the biological father of the child growing inside me. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like he needed a hot meal and 12 hours of sleep. Bring him in, I said. Dante didn't have to use force. He just rolled down the window and said a name. Leo froze. He looked at the black SUV, then at the empty street. He knew this day would come. He got in the back seat, shaking dripping rainwater onto the leather upholstery. He smelled like old coffee and fear. I didn't know, were the first words out of his mouth. I swear to God, lady, I didn't know who you were. I turned around in the front seat to look at him. He had Caleb's jawline. He had Caleb's nose. It was terrifying how well my husband had cast this role. What did he tell you? I asked, keeping my voice even. Leo wiped his wet hands on his jeans. He said he was a researcher for a private genetics firm. He said they were doing a study on high intelligence inheritance. He said it was anonymous. He paid me $20,000 cash, in an envelope. $20,000. That was the price of my marriage. For Caleb, it was a rounding error in his gambling debts. For this kid, it was probably his entire tuition. He made me sign an NDA, Leo continued, his voice cracking. He said if I ever told anyone, he'd sue me for breach of contract. He said he'd ruin my medical career before it started. He lied, I said. He's not a researcher. He's my husband. And he stole your genetic material to trap me in a fraud scheme. Leo went pale. Oh my God. I can give the money back. I haven't spent it all. Please, I can't go to jail. I want to be a doctor. I looked at him. I should have hated him. He was the accomplice. But looking at his terrified eyes, I only felt a strange, maternal, fierce protection. He wasn't the villain. He was just another victim of Caleb's charm. You're not going to jail, Leo, I said. And you're keeping the money. He blinked. I am. Yes, but in exchange, I need you to sign a new document. I pulled an affidavit from my bag. This states exactly what happened, that you were paid outside of clinic protocol, that you were coerced. You sign this, and Dante here forgets he ever found you. Leo signed it. His hand shook so hard he almost ripped the paper. Scritch, scratch. The sound of the pen on paper was the sound of the first nail in Caleb's coffin. Get out, I said softly. Go be a doctor. Save lives. Make up for this. He scrambled out of the car and ran into the rain, disappearing like he never existed. But I had the paper. I had the proof. Ding! The sound of the bell on the door of Joe's diner was sharp and cheerful, a stark contrast to the mood at our next stop. The smell of frying bacon and stale cigarette smoke hit me instantly. This was the suburbs, the kind of place people move to when they want to be invisible. Molly sat in the back booth. She was wearing a nurse's scrub top, but she looked exhausted. She was stirring her coffee round and round, creating a little whirlpool of black liquid. I slid into the booth opposite her. Dante stood by the door, arms crossed, blocking the only exit. Molly looked up. Her spoon clattered against the ceramic mug. Clink. Mrs. Rossi, she whispered. She didn't ask how I found her. She knew. Hello, Molly, I said. I placed my designer handbag on the sticky table. Nice place. A bit far from the clinic, isn't it? I quit, she said, looking down at her hands. I couldn't do it anymore. Guilt is a heavy thing to carry, I said. Heavier than the $30,000 Caleb paid you to swap the samples. Her head snapped up. I needed that money, she hissed, her eyes suddenly defensive. My son. He needed surgery. Insurance wouldn't cover it. Your husband, he came to me like an angel. He said he was helping me. He said nobody would get hurt. Nobody? I leaned forward. I got hurt, Molly. My child got hurt. We are living a lie because you decided your problems were more important than my life. I'm sorry, she started to cry. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't fix it. I cut her off. My voice was cold steel. But testimony does. I opened the folder. I laid out the photos of her meeting Caleb in the parking lot, photos Dante had recovered from security footage she thought was deleted. I laid out the bank transfer records. Here is the situation, I said, pointing at the papers. Option A, I give this to the police. You go to prison for medical fraud and conspiracy. It's a federal crime. You get 10 years minimum. Your son grows up visiting you behind glass. Molly sobbed, covering her mouth. Option B, I continued. You become my witness. You testify against Caleb. You tell the world he bribed you. You tell them he orchestrated the whole thing. In exchange, I hire the best defense attorney in the state for you. We plead you down to a misdemeanor. No jail time. Probation. I paused, letting the silence stretch. The diner was noisy dishes, clattering, people laughing, but at our table it was dead silent. So, Molly, I asked, do you want to be Caleb's accomplice, or do you want to be his executioner? She looked at the photos. She looked at Dante guarding the door. Then she looked at me. She saw that the crying, desperate woman she remembered from the clinic was gone. He'll kill me, she whispered. He knows people. He knows loan sharks, I corrected. And right now, those loan sharks are looking for him, not you. I can protect you, Molly. Caleb can't even protect himself. She took a shaky breath. She reached for a napkin and wiped her eyes. Then she nodded. Okay, she said. I'll do it. I'll tell them everything. Good. I slid a recording device across the table. Click. The red light blinked on. Start from the beginning. Start with the day he walked into the clinic and asked for a price. As she began to speak, pouring out the dirty secrets of my marriage, I looked out the window. The rain had stopped. The sun was trying to break through the clouds. I had the donor. I had the witness. I had the financial records. The investigation was over. The trial was about to begin. But it wasn't going to be in a courtroom. It was going to be at the baby reveal party. I checked my phone. One new message from Caleb. Can't wait for tonight, babe. The partners are so excited. Love you. I typed back. Me too. It's going to be a blast. I wasn't lying. It was going to be a blast. The kind that leaves nothing but a crater behind. The black velvet box snapped shut. Snap. It was a small sound, but in the silence of our master bedroom, it sounded like a judge's gavel coming down. I looked at the diamond cufflinks sitting on the dresser. I bought them for Caleb 3 Christmases ago. They were engraved with his initials, C.R. Caleb Rossi. Today, those initials felt like a branding iron. I picked them up, feeling the cold metal against my skin, and walked into the walk-in closet where my husband was preparing for the performance of a lifetime. He was standing in front of the full-length mirror practicing his smile. It was fascinating to watch. He would relax his face, look down, and then look up, slowly, widening his eyes to create that perfect look of humble gratitude. Thank you all for coming. he whispered to his reflection, sweeping his arm out to an imaginary crowd. Tonight is about love. It's about family. He paused, frowned, and shook his head. No, too cheesy. Try again. He cleared his throat. Tonight is about legacy. I stood in the doorway holding the cufflinks, watching him rehearse his lies. He looked devastatingly handsome. He was wearing a midnight blue tuxedo that cost more than my first car. His hair was perfectly gelled. He looked like a king about to address his subjects. He didn't know he was actually a prisoner walking toward the gallows. "You look nervous," I said, stepping into the room. Caleb jumped slightly, then spun around. The mask slid back into place instantly. "Babe, you scared me. I'm not nervous. Just want everything to be perfect for you, for the baby." "It will be perfect," I said, walking toward him. I made sure of it. And I had. For the last 6 hours, while Caleb was meditating to prepare for the party, I had been orchestrating his destruction with the precision of a military general. I went downstairs and checked the seating chart one last time. Table 1, the investors. I put them right in the front row so they wouldn't miss a single detail of their money vanishing. Table 2, the family. My mother, looking like a hawk in black lace, is ready to watch the kill. And then the hidden guests. I had spoken to the catering manager, a sweet woman named Rosa, who had been with us for years. Rosa. I had told her, handing her a thick envelope of cash. "There will be 2 extra staff members tonight. They will be wearing server uniforms, but they won't be serving food. They will be standing by the back exits. Do not ask them for help with the trays." Rosa didn't ask questions, she just nodded. She didn't know those servers were actually plainclothes detectives from the fraud division, armed with the warrant Dante had secured an hour ago. "Here," I said to Caleb, holding out the cufflinks. "Let me help." He smiled, extending his wrists. I slid the metal through the buttonholes of his silk shirt. My fingers brushed against his pulse point. It was beating slow and steady. Thump, thump. No guilt, no fear. Just pure, unadulterated arrogance. "You're shaking, Luna," he said softly, looking down at me with mock concern. "Are you okay? Is the baby okay?" "I'm just overwhelmed," I lied, fastening the second cufflink. "I keep thinking about how everything is going to change after tonight." "It is," he said, his eyes gleaming. "Once the partners see the announcement, once we secure that funding, we're going to be untouchable, Luna. We're going to rule this city." He reached for his bow tie, fumbling with the black silk. "Damn it. I can never get this right." "Let me," I whispered. I stepped closer. I reached up and took the 2 ends of the tie in my hands. I wrapped the silk around his neck. I felt the warmth of his skin. I smelled his cologne, sandalwood, and lies. For a second, I tightened the fabric just a little too much. His eyes widened slightly. "Tight," he rasped. "Sorry," I said, loosening it. "Just want it to hold." I tied the knot. I smoothed the edges. I looked at him, really looked at him. This was the man I had promised to love and cherish. This was the man I had prayed for. And now I was looking at a stranger. "There," I said, patting his chest. "Perfect." I thought to myself, enjoy the silk, Caleb, because where you're going, the only thing you'll be wearing is an orange jumpsuit and cheap cotton. "You're the best wife a man could ask for," he said, leaning in to kiss me. I turned my head at the last second, letting his lips graze my cheek. "We should go down," I said, pulling away. "The guests are arriving. I can hear the cars on the gravel." Crunch, crunch, crunch. The sound of tires on the driveway drifted up through the open window. It sounded like an army approaching. "Right," Caleb said, checking his reflection one last time. He adjusted his jacket, shot finger guns at himself in the mirror, and winked. "Showtime!" He walked out of the room, his stride confident, his head held high. I watched him go. I waited until his footsteps faded down the hall. Then I walked over to the bedside table. I opened the drawer and pulled out the blue folder. It wasn't thick, but it was heavy. Inside was the affidavit from Leo, the transcript from Molly, the financial records from Dante, and the DNA test results I had were rushed through a private lab this morning. I held the folder against my chest. My heart was pounding now, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. This was it. There was no turning back. I walked to the door, turned off the lights, and plunged the room into darkness. "Showtime," I whispered to the empty room. I walked out into the hallway, the folder tucked securely under my arm, hidden beneath my shawl. Below me, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses rose up from the ballroom. It sounded like a celebration. But as I descended the grand staircase step by step, I knew better. It wasn't a party. It was a funeral. And I was the one delivering the eulogy. The ballroom smelled of white truffles and old money. It's a specific scent, earthy, rich, and slightly suffocating. I walked into the room, my hand resting on Caleb's arm, and felt the collective gaze of 50 people slide over us. They weren't looking at us with love. They were appraising us. To them, we weren't a couple expecting a miracle baby. We were a merger. We were a portfolio diversification. "Smile, babe," Caleb whispered through his teeth, waving at the CEO of a hedge fund who had just swallowed a shrimp whole. "Mr. Henderson is looking." I smiled. My face was starting to hurt from all the smiling. We took our seats at the head table. The centerpiece was a monstrosity of white orchids and silver candelabras that blocked my view of the exit. Maybe that was intentional. Caleb wanted me focused on him, not on the doors where the servers, my plainclothes detectives, were currently pouring sparkling water and checking their concealed holsters. Dinner was served. Saffron risotto with osso buco. It was my grandfather's signature dish, the one that put Rossi Culinary on the map. The rice was golden yellow, flecked with actual 24-karat gold leaf. I watched Caleb eat. He shoveled the gold-flecked rice into his mouth with an enthusiasm that turned my stomach. He wasn't just eating dinner. He was consuming my heritage. He wiped a smudge of saffron sauce from his lip with a linen napkin, his eyes darting around the room, counting the net worth of every guest. "Delicious," he said, reaching for my hand under the table. His palm was sweaty. "Your grandfather really knew how to charge people for rice, didn't he?" He laughed. I pulled my hand away, pretending to reach for my wine glass. I took a sip. It was water, but I wished it were vodka. I needed something to numb the urge to stab him with my salad fork. "So, Caleb," Mr. Henderson boomed from across the table, his voice loud enough to rattle the crystal. "We hear rumors about a new trust structure. You securing the legacy—" Caleb straightened up. This was his cue. He had been waiting for this moment all night. He tapped his spoon against his champagne flute. Ting, ting, ting. The sharp, high-pitched sound cut through the murmur of conversation. The room fell silent. 50 pairs of eyes turned to the head table. The waiter stopped moving. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Caleb stood up. He adjusted his jacket buttons, straining slightly against his chest. He looked powerful. He looked responsible. He looked like the perfect heir to the Rossi throne. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson." Caleb began, his voice smooth as velvet. "You know, becoming a father changes a man. It makes you think about the future, about protection." He looked down at me, his eyes softening into that practiced look of adoration. "Luna and I, we struggled to get here. You all know that. This baby is a miracle." A collective awe rippled through the room. Someone dabbed their eyes with a napkin. "But a miracle needs to be protected," Caleb continued, his voice dropping an octave, becoming serious. "In this world, clarity is everything. We have significant assets to protect for this child, and I believe that true stewardship means transparency." He paused for effect. He was so good at this. He was building the trap plank by plank right in front of everyone. "That is why," Caleb announced, raising his voice, "I have decided that immediately upon the birth of our child, we will be conducting a full DNA paternity test." The room went quiet for a split second. A DNA test? It sounded aggressive. It sounded accusatory. But Caleb was ready. Not because of doubt. He laughed, waving his hand dismissively. Good heavens, no. But because I want to establish an irrevocable trust fund for the baby tied strictly to biological lineage. I want there to be zero legal ambiguity. I want my son or daughter to be secure forever with proof that stands up in any court. He raised his glass. To the truth and to the Rossi legacy. It was brilliant. Twisted evil and brilliant. He had framed the DNA test, the very weapon he intended to use to accuse me of cheating under Clause 17, as an act of fatherly love. If I refused now, I would look suspicious. If I agreed, I was walking into his trap. To the legacy, Mr. Henderson shouted, raising his glass. To the legacy! The room echoed. Applause broke out. Enthusiastic, thunderous applause. They loved him. They thought he was being a prudent modern businessman protecting his family's fortune. I looked across the room. Through the forest of orchids, I caught the eye of the only person who wasn't clapping. My mother, Donatella. She was sitting perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. She was wearing a black dress that looked suspiciously like morning attire. Her face was a mask of stone, but her eyes were burning. She looked at Caleb, then she looked at me. And then, slowly, terrifyingly, the corner of her mouth lifted. It wasn't a smile, it was a signal. Now. Caleb sat down, flushed with victory. He leaned close to my ear. See, he whispered, squeezing my shoulder. They love the idea. It's for the best, Luna. Just a formality. He thought he had won. He thought the game was over. He was already spending the $5 million in his head. I looked at the gold leaf remaining on his plate. I looked at the servers near the door who had stopped pouring water and were now moving silently into position behind the guests. I took a deep breath. The smell of truffles was suddenly replaced by the metallic taste of adrenaline. You're right, Caleb. I said, my voice cutting through the applause as it died down. I didn't whisper. I spoke clearly, loudly. I pushed my chair back. Scrape. The sound was harsh against the marble floor. Caleb looked at me confused. Luna. What are you doing? You don't have to speak. Oh, but I do, I said, standing up. My legs weren't shaking anymore. They felt like roots anchoring me to the earth, to the house my grandfather built, to the truth. I reached under the table and pulled out the blue folder. You wanted to talk about the truth, Caleb, I said, holding the folder up for everyone to see. You wanted to talk about DNA. You wanted transparency. The room went deadly silent again. This wasn't part of the script. The investors shifted in their seats. I think that's a wonderful idea. I smiled, and I knew it was the same smile my mother was wearing. So, why wait for the birth? Why don't we look at the DNA results? Right now. Caleb's smile faltered. His eyes dropped to the blue folder. For the first time all night, the color drained from his face. He recognized the logo on the cover. It wasn't a trust fund document. It was a lab report. Luna, he warned, his voice low and dangerous. Sit down. You're being hormonal. No, Caleb, I said, opening the folder. I'm being a Rossi. I looked at the crowd. I looked at the man who tried to destroy me. And I flipped the first page. The first page of the folder made a sharp crackle as I turned it. That sound was the only thing I could hear in the massive ballroom. 50 people were staring at me. Caleb was staring at me. His smile was starting to look a little stiff, like day-old frosting. What is that, Luna? He asked, his voice tight. He laughed nervously, looking at the investors. My wife loves her scrapbooks. Is this the baby album already? Not exactly, I said, my voice ringing clear without the microphone. You wanted transparency, Caleb. You wanted to protect the legacy. You wanted a DNA test to ensure the trust fund goes to the right heir. I paused, looking him dead in the eye. I agree with you completely. Caleb blinked. He looked confused. This wasn't the script. I was supposed to cry. I was supposed to refuse. I was supposed to look guilty. In fact, I continued, stepping away from the table. I thought it was such a brilliant idea that I didn't want to wait until the birth. I wanted to give you peace of mind tonight. I raised my hand. At the back of the room, Dante, dressed in a waiter's uniform, nodded once. He pressed a button on the wall panel. The lights in the chandeliers dimmed. A massive motorized screen descended from the ceiling behind the head table, blocking the view of the garden. It came down slow and heavy like a guillotine blade. I took the liberty of running a few tests of my own, I said. And since we are all family and partners here, I think you all deserve to see the results. The projector beam cut through the darkness, blindingly bright. It hit the screen with a flash of blue light. Slide 1. Chain of custody log. Date November 12th. The text was huge. You couldn't miss it. It showed the timestamps. It showed the name, Gary Thorne. It showed the swap. This, I said, pointing at the screen with a steady hand, is the official log from the fertility clinic. It shows that on the day our child was conceived, my husband's sample was thrown in the trash. A gasp rippled through the room. It sounded like all the air was being sucked out of the building at once. And this? I clicked the remote. Click. Slide 2, bank transfer, $20,000. Recipient: Leo donor 4922. This is the payment my husband made to a 20-year-old college student to buy his genetic material on the black market. Caleb stood up so fast his chair fell over backward. Crash. The sound echoed violently. "Turn it off!" he screamed. His face wasn't handsome anymore. It was twisted red and ugly. "She's lying. She's crazy. It's the hormones." He looked frantically at Mr. Henderson. "It's a fake. She made it up." "I didn't make up the bank records, Caleb," I said, my voice calm, contrasting his panic. "And I certainly didn't make up this." Click. Slide 3. The Rossi Young Chefs Charity Fund. The screen is filled with a spreadsheet. Hundreds of lines. Red numbers. "You wanted to protect the trust fund," I asked, turning to look at him. He was shaking now, visibly shaking. "You should have started by protecting the charity. These are the withdrawals you made, Caleb. $9,000 here, $9,000 there. You stole over $200,000 from underprivileged kids to pay for your gambling debts." The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. It was the kind of silence that happens after a car crash before the screaming starts. Mr. Henderson stood up slowly. He picked up his napkin and placed it on the table. He didn't look at Caleb. He looked at the screen. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "No. No," Caleb stammered. He was sweating, wiping his forehead with his sleeve. "It's a misunderstanding. I can explain. I was investing it for the firm." "In what?" I asked, stepping closer to him. I could smell the fear on him now. It smelled sour, like old milk. "In crypto futures, in sports bets." I clicked the remote one last time. Slide 4. The loan shark debt, $5.2 million. "You owe $5 million to criminals, Caleb," I said softly, so only he and the front table could hear. "And you were planning to use Clause 17 of our prenup to pay it back. You were going to frame me, take my family's money, and leave me with nothing." Caleb looked at the screen, then at me. His eyes were wide, terrified. He realized the trap hadn't snapped on me. It had snapped on him. "Luna," he whispered, reaching for my hand. "Baby, please, don't do this. We can fix this. I love you." I looked at his hand. The hand that held the syringe, the hand that held the other woman. "You don't love me, Caleb," I said. "You love the money." I signaled to the servers standing by the doors. They stepped forward, pulling their badges out from under their vests. The glimmer of gold police shields caught the light of the projector. "And unfortunately for you," I said, "the bank is closed." The guests at the back tables started to stand up. Chairs scraped, glasses knocked over. The red wedding of the Rossi family was in full swing and nobody was eating the cake. My mother Donatella hadn't moved. She was still sitting there sipping her wine, watching the screen like it was her favorite movie. She caught my eye and nodded. A tiny, almost invisible nod. Good kill. Caleb backed away, bumping into the table. You set me up, he hissed. No, I said, dropping the remote on the table. Clatter. I just turned on the lights. She's lying? This is a deepfake technology, can do anything these days. Caleb was screaming now, his voice cracking high and thin like a panic alarm. He scrambled toward Mr. Henderson, grabbing the older man's arm with desperate, sweaty hands. Sir, you know me. You know my character. I wouldn't do this. I wouldn't steal. This is a mental breakdown. My wife is unwell. The pregnancy hormones have made her paranoid. Mr. Henderson pulled his arm away as if Caleb's touch burned him. He brushed off his expensive suit jacket, his face twisted in disgust. He didn't look at Caleb. He looked at the screen where the debt figure $5.2 million was still glowing in harsh red light. Sit down, Caleb, Mr. Henderson said, his voice cold as liquid nitrogen. You're making a scene. I won't sit down. I am being framed. Caleb turned to the room, his eyes wild, searching for an ally. He looked at his mother-in-law. Donatella, tell them Luna has been acting crazy for months. My mother didn't blink. She slowly picked up her fork and took a bite of the saffron risotto. She chewed, swallowed, and dabbed her mouth with a linen napkin. It was the most disrespectful thing I had ever seen, and it was beautiful. You want witnesses, Caleb? I asked, my voice cutting through his hysteria. You say I'm making this up. You say technology can fake anything. I took a step closer to him. Well, you can't fake flesh and blood. I nodded toward the kitchen doors. Creak. The heavy swinging doors pushed open. Leo walked out. He wasn't wearing his hoodie anymore. I had bought him a suit. It was cheap off the rack, but he looked respectable. He looked like a young man with a conscience. He walked straight to the center of the room, his hands shaking slightly, but his chin up. Caleb froze. He looked at Leo like he was seeing a ghost. His mouth opened-closed, then opened again. Who is this? He stammered, feigning ignorance, but the sweat running down his temple gave him away. You know who I am, Mr. Rossi, Leo said. His voice shook, but it was loud enough. My name is Leo. I am donor 4922. A gasp went through the room. You paid me $20,000 in cash behind the clinic on 4th Street. Leo continued, looking directly at the investors. You told me it was for a research study. You lied to me. And because of you, I am the biological father of that woman's child. He pointed at me. Liar! Caleb lunged at him. I've never seen this kid in my life. 2 security guards, my servers, stepped forward, instantly blocking Caleb's path. They didn't touch him yet. They just stood there, walls of muscle in black vests. If he's a liar, Dr. Evans's voice rang out from the back of the room, then so am I. Caleb spun around. Dr. Evans walked in, followed closely by Molly. They were wearing their clinic coats, the symbols of medical authority. I have the original logs, Caleb, Dr. Evans said, holding up a sealed evidence bag. I have the vial you discarded. And Molly? She turned to the nurse. Molly stepped forward. She was crying, but she didn't look down. He paid me $30,000, she sobbed, addressing the crowd. He told me he had a genetic disease he didn't want his wife to know about. He begged me. He used my son's medical bills against me. She looked at Caleb with pure hatred. You said nobody would get hurt. You destroyed my life. Caleb backed away. He bumped into the head table. The silverware clattered. Clang. Clatter. He was surrounded. The donor is in front of him, the medical staff behind him, the debt on the screen above him. The mask of the golden boy finally cracked. It didn't just crack, it shattered into 1,000,000 jagged pieces. You think you're so smart? Caleb spat, turning on me. His face was ugly now, twisted into a snarl. You think you've won? You're nothing without me, Luna. Nothing. You're just a spoiled little princess sitting on a pile of money you didn't earn. I managed that money. I grew that money. You stole that money. Dante's voice rumbled from the corner. He stepped into the light holding a thick stack of papers. We have the trading logs, Caleb. We have the IP addresses. We know about the bookie in Macau. We know about the consulting fees you paid to yourself. Dante threw the papers onto the table. They fanned out, sliding across the polished wood until they hit Caleb's hand. Caleb looked down. He saw his secret life spread out for everyone to see. The bets, the losses, the desperate transfers from the charity fund. He looked up at the investors. Their faces were stone. He looked at his friends in the room. They were looking at their shoes. Then he did something pathetic. He fell to his knees. Thud. He crawled toward me, grabbing the hem of my dress. "Luna, baby, please," he sobbed, tears streaming down his face. "I have a problem. It's a sickness. I'm an addict. I need help. You can't send me to jail. I'm the father of your child. Well, on paper, I'm your husband. We can fix this. I'll go to rehab. I'll pay it back. Just tell them to stop." I looked down at him. A year ago, this sight would have broken my heart. I would have knelt down with him. I would have held him. I would have written a check to fix it. But the Luna who fixed broken things was dead. I pulled my dress from his grip. "You're not sick, Caleb," I said, my voice devoid of pity. "You're greedy, and you're not the father of my child. You're just the man who signed the check." I looked at the detectives. Officers. The two servers didn't wait. They moved in. Fast, efficient. One grabbed Caleb's left arm, the other grabbed his right. They hauled him up from the floor. He kicked and screamed, his expensive shoes scuffing the marble. "Get off me. Do you know who I am? I am Caleb Rossi." "You're Caleb Smith," I corrected him. "You took my name, and now I'm taking it back." Click, click. The sound of the handcuffs locking was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was better than music. It was the sound of freedom. Caleb stopped screaming. He stared at the metal cuffs on his wrists. The reality finally hit him. The game was over. The house of cards had fallen. "Take him out," I said. As they dragged him toward the door, passing the tables of shocked guests, he passed my mother. Donatella Rossi. She stood up slowly. She held a glass of red wine in her hand. A 1996 Barolo. My grandfather's favorite vintage. Deep, dark blood red. Caleb looked at her, his eyes pleading. "Mom, Donatella." My mother didn't say a word. She didn't shout. She just looked at him with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. And then, with a flick of her wrist, she threw the wine. Splash! The dark red liquid hit Caleb's pristine white tuxedo shirt. It soaked in instantly, spreading like a gunshot wound over his heart. It splashed up onto his face, dripping down his nose like blood. He gasped, sputtering the taste of expensive grapes and humiliation in his mouth. "That," my mother said, her voice carrying through the silent room, "is for the dry cleaning bill you won't be able to afford." The guests gasped then. Silence. Absolute stunned silence. Caleb stood there, stained, handcuffed, and defeated. He looked small. He looked cheap. The detectives shoved him forward, and he stumbled out the double doors into the waiting police cruiser, whose lights were flashing red and blue against the garden windows. Wee woo! Wee woo! The siren wailed as the car drove away, fading into the distance. I stood alone at the front of the room. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I looked at the crowd. They were waiting for me to crumble. They were waiting for the grieving wife act. I picked up my glass of sparkling water. I raised it to the room. "I apologize for the interruption," I said, and I meant it. "Please enjoy the ossobuco. It's delicious." I took a sip. My mother walked over to me. She put her arm around my shoulders. She didn't hug me tight. She just squeezed firm and solid. "You did well, Luna," she whispered. "You bled him dry without spilling a drop of your own." I looked at her. I looked at the empty chair where my husband used to sit, and for the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel heavy. I felt light. I felt empty, yes, but it was a clean emptiness, a space waiting to be filled with something real. But as the waiters started clearing the plates and the murmur of conversation slowly returned to the room, I felt a tiny kick in my stomach. Bump. The baby. My baby. I smiled. Caleb was gone. The debt was exposed. But there was one loose end left. One person standing in the middle of the room looking awkward in his cheap suit, not knowing whether to stay or run. Leo. I wasn't done yet. The revenge was finished. But the story of my family, was just beginning. And I had one more decision to make. The sound of a judge's gavel hitting wood is surprisingly hollow. Thwack. It doesn't sound like justice. It sounds like a door closing. I sat in the back row of the federal courthouse wearing sunglasses to hide the lack of tears. Caleb stood in front of the bench. He wasn't wearing his midnight blue tuxedo anymore. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big. He looked small. He looked like a deflated balloon. 12 years, the judge said, for wire fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement. Caleb didn't scream. He didn't beg. He just slumped. He looked back at me one last time as the marshals led him away. His eyes were empty. He was looking for the woman who used to fix his problems, the woman who used to write checks to make the bad things go away. But that woman wasn't in the courtroom. I didn't visit him. But Dante kept me updated. He told me that Caleb's friends from the betting ring found him inside. Apparently, prison walls don't stop loan sharks. They just change the currency. Caleb fell in the shower during his second week. Broken nose, 3 fractured ribs. He is paying his debt now day by day, bruise by bruise. He wanted to be a high-stakes player. Well, he finally got a game he couldn't cheat at. As for Leo, poor, terrified Leo. I met him one last time at a coffee shop near the university. He looked like he expected me to arrest him. I don't know what to do, he said, staring at his latte. Do you want me to be a dad? I laughed. It was a gentle laugh. No, Leo, you're 20 years old. You're a child yourself. Go to med school. Be a brilliant doctor. Save lives. I slid an envelope across the table. It wasn't a bribe. It was a scholarship. The Rossi Foundation has a new beneficiary. Don't waste it. He took it. He walked away. He is the biology. He is the spark. But he is not the fire. The fire arrived 3 months later. Wah! The cry was loud, angry, and absolutely beautiful. Stella Rossi came into the world kicking and screaming. She didn't have Caleb's eyes. She had mine. She had the Rossi eyes, dark, demanding, and full of life. When the nurse placed her on my chest, warm and slippery and perfect, I looked around the room. There was no husband holding my hand. There was no perfect family photo op. There was just my mother, Donatella. She was standing by the bed looking at her granddaughter with a fierce, protective love. She reached out and touched Stella's tiny hand. She's strong, Mom said. She has a good grip. She's a Rossi, I whispered. I looked at my mother, the woman I had pushed away for 2 years, the woman I called bitter and jealous. I realized then that I had been so wrong about what love looks like. I used to think love was soft. I thought it was sweet words, expensive gifts, and compliance. I thought love meant never fighting. Caleb gave me that kind of love. It was sugar-coated poison. Real love. Real love is a knife. It's sharp. It's dangerous. It cuts. But it doesn't cut to hurt you. It cuts to save you. My mother was the surgeon who saw the gangrene in my life before I did. She was willing to let me hate her, willing to let me scream at her just so she could be there to catch me when the rot finally fell away. Gia din, I thought, remembering an old Italian proverb my grandfather used to say. Family isn't just the people who share your blood. Family is the people who are willing to bleed for you. 6 months later. The morning sun hit the marble island in my kitchen. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't lonely but peaceful. I poured hot water over the tea leaves. Sizzle. The smell of chamomile and lemon filled the air, my grandmother's recipe. I took a sip. It was hot, grounding, real. Through the window I could see the garden. The roses were blooming, the weeds were gone. I looked at the counter. There were two things sitting there. One was a baby monitor. On the screen, Stella was sleeping soundly, her chest rising and falling in a perfect rhythm. The other was a set of car keys, not to a Tesla, to the 1974 Porsche 911 Targa. I picked up the keys. The metal was cool and heavy in my hand. I didn't need a passenger. I didn't need a co-pilot, and I certainly didn't need a man to tell me which road to take. Caleb thought he married a princess he could lock in a tower. He forgot that towers are just high ground for archers. I finished my tea. I checked on my daughter, then I walked out into the sun. The air tasted